There are moments in life when an unseen whisper stirs the soul, calling it to something greater. It is not a summons to comfort, nor a beckoning toward power, but a quiet, persistent voice that speaks of purpose. Throughout history, those who have heard this call, the chosen ones, have been misunderstood, set apart, and burdened with a path not of their choosing. To be chosen is not to be exalted, but to be entrusted. It is the weight of a lantern bearer in the dead of night, one who must walk ahead though the treacherous road. The world, teetering on the edge of chaos, looks not for conquerors, but for those who will stand firm, unshaken by storm or shadow. The chosen ones do not seek their calling seeks them. And when it comes, they must answer, not with words, but with the courage to walk forward. The calling of the chosen ones. Ethan had always felt different. As a child, he would stare at the stars, feeling as though they whispered secrets only he could hear. While others were content with the routine of daily life, he felt an ache, a longing for something beyond the ordinary. It was not mere ambition, but a deep, inescapable knowing that he was meant for something greater. One evening, as he sat alone on the hill behind his village, an unfamiliar presence settled over him. It was not seen, but felt, a weight, yet light as air. Then a voice, neither loud nor soft, but resonant with authority, spoke within him. "Ethan, rise. You have been called." His heart pounded. "Who are you?" he whispered. "The one who formed the stars and placed that longing in your soul," the voice replied. "You are not alone. There are others, scattered across the world, each chosen for a purpose beyond themselves." Ethan struggled to comprehend. Chosen? For what? To stand as a light in the darkness, to carry truth where deception reigns. To walk the path of the chosen is not to be lifted above others, but to serve, to suffer, and to endure. At that moment, memories flashed through his mind, times he had felt out of place, moments of loneliness, of misunderstanding. He had often wondered why he did not belong. Now he understood. He was never meant to. "Well, I am just a simple man," Ethan said, doubt creeping in. "Why me? There is no one truly worthy of the call," the voice answered. "It is not given to the perfect, but to those willing. The question is not whether you are ready, but whether you will answer." A great silence followed. Ethan felt the weight of choice pressing upon him. He knew deep down that to ignore this call would be to live half a life, a shadow of what could have been. Finally he stood. "I will go," he said, his voice firm though his hands trembled. A warmth filled him, a certainty he had never known. The presence lifted, but the call remained, embedded in his soul. He did not know where the path would lead, only that it was his to walk. Ethan's journey began that night. The road was not marked, nor was it paved with comfort. As he left his village behind, he felt the first sting of the burden. His family, bewildered by his decision, refused to understand. Friends he had grown up with called him foolish, and some pitied him. Yet, as he walked, he met others. A woman named Elira, who had once been a queen, but had forsaken her throne for truth. A warrior named Tobias, who had fought battles not of flesh and blood, but of spirit and will. Each bore the same mark of longing, the same call echoing in their souls. They traveled together, learning, growing, strengthening one another. They encountered darkness, false prophets who twisted truth, oppressors who thrived on silence, fears that clawed at their resolve. But in each trial, they found the light within them growing stronger, piercing through the night. One evening by the fire, Ethan asked Elira, "How do we know we are on the right path?" She smiled, her gaze steady. "Because the darkness fights us. If we walked the easy road, we would not be chosen," Tobias nodded. "And because even in our suffering there is joy, a joy the world does not understand." Ethan pondered their words, and something within him solidified. The path was hard, but it was good. He understood now that being chosen was not about greatness, but about obedience. The stars had whispered to him for years, and now, for the first time, he whispered back. Far beyond that village, in hidden corners of the world, others felt the same stirring in their hearts. The chosen were awakening, and the world would never be the same. The burden and purpose of the chosen ones. Cold and bright, the stars stretched endlessly over the desert as Elijah sat by the fire. The embers crackled, their glow reflecting in his weary eyes. He had wandered far, seeking solitude after being cast out by those he was sent to guide. The weight of his calling pressed upon him like a yoke that could not be removed. "And with me, Lord," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the wind. "Why choose me for this path of hardship and rejection?" A gentle voice stirred within him, not audible but resounding in the depths of his soul. Being chosen is not about superiority but responsibility. You are not called to be greater than others, but to serve, heal, and transform. Elijah bowed his head, remembering the prophets before him, Moses who faced Pharaoh's wrath, David who fled from Saul, and Jeremiah who wept over Jerusalem. None had been spared suffering. All had walked the lonely road of the chosen. He realized that the trials he faced were not signs of abandonment, but the refining fire of his purpose. Suddenly, a rustling in the distance caught his attention. A figure emerged from the shadows. An old man leaning on a staff, his face etched with the wisdom of many years. "You ask why you are chosen," the man said. "But have you considered what would happen if you were not?" Elijah studied the stranger. "What do you mean? If not you, then who? If no one answers the call, who will stand when others falter? Who will bring light when darkness prevails?" The old man's eyes gleamed as he spoke. "The burden of the chosen is not ease, but endurance. Not privilege, but perseverance." Elijah clenched his fists, recalling the rejection he had endured. "But it is difficult. The people do not listen. They mock. They scorn. Sometimes I feel as if I stand alone." The stranger nodded. "Indeed. But were you not warned? Did not the prophets before you face the same? To be chosen is to be tested. Your trials are not signs of failure, but of faithfulness." Elijah closed his eyes, his heart wrestling with the truth. The path of the chosen was not one of comfort, but of conviction. To guide, to heal, to transform. This was his calling. And though the steep road and the cold nights, he would walk it. When he opened his eyes again, the old man was gone. Only the fire remained, burning steadily in the darkness. Elijah rose to his feet, shoulders no lighter, but heart renewed. The burden remained, but now he understood. It was not his to carry alone. And so, with the wind whispering through the desert, he walked into the unknown, ready to fulfill his purpose. The days turned to weeks, and Elijah journeyed through barren lands, encountering those who had lost hope. He met a widow, starving with her child, and with a prayer he called forth sustenance from an empty jar. He stood against false prophets, unwavering in the face of their mockery. He healed the sick, comforted the broken, and whispered truth into the ears of those who doubted. Each act was met with resistance. Many rejected him, calling him mad, a fool, a disruptor of peace. Yet he pressed on, for he knew now that rejection was not failure, but proof that his message carried weight. The chosen ones do not walk an easy path. They walk a necessary one. One evening, a young man approached him as he rested beneath the shade of an olive tree. "Master, I have heard of you. They say you speak for God. How can I know if I too am chosen?" Elijah looked at him and smiled. "Do you feel the stir in your soul, the whisper that does not fade? Do you find yourself unable to ignore the suffering of the world? Does the thought of turning away bring you more pain than facing the trials ahead? The young man hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes. Then you already know, Elijah said. Being chosen is not a moment, a life lived in obedience, love, and sacrifice. You may fall and doubt, but if you keep rising and listening, you will never be lost. The young man sat beside him, silent for a long time. Then, with the firelight dancing in his eyes, he whispered, "Then I will go." Elijah watched as another answered the call, as another took up the burden. He knew the path would never be empty, for though the chosen ones feel alone, they are never truly so. And as he gazed up at the night sky, he felt the quiet assurance that his purpose was not in vain, and neither was his suffering. The calling of the chosen ones. Nathanael had always felt different. As a child, he had often stood at the edge of the village, staring at the horizon as though something beyond it was calling his name. While others were content with their daily routines, he was restless, his heart stirred by an unseen force. One night, as he sat beneath the ancient oak tree at the center of the village, a stranger approached him. Clad in a robe that shimmered like the dawn, the man's eyes held the depth of eternity. "You feel it, don't you?" the stranger asked. Nathanael hesitated. "Feel what?" "The calling, the sense that you were meant for something greater." A cold wind rustled the leaves. Nathanael had never spoken of this feeling to anyone, yet this man knew. "Who are you?" he asked. The stranger smiled. "A messenger. And you, Nathanael, are one of the chosen." Nathanael's life changed that night. He began to see the world differently, not as it was, but as it could be. He noticed those who suffered in silence, the forgotten and the lost. And with this newfound awareness came a burden. "Where will me?" he asked the messenger one evening. "I am no prophet, no warrior. I am just a man." "Precisely," the messenger replied. "God does not call the powerful, he calls the willing, and willingness is the mark of the chosen." Nathanael wrestled with this truth. He had read the old stories of Moses who stammered before kings, of David, a mere shepherd who became a king, of Mary, a simple girl chosen to bear the world's light. None had sought their calling, yet they had answered. Doubt still gripped him when the first test came. One morning, a young boy, dirty and trembling, appeared at Nathanael's door. "They cast me out," the boy whimpered. "I have nowhere to go." Nathanael looked into his hollow eyes. The village had always been harsh on the weak. Once, he might have turned the boy away, afraid of what others would say, but something within him had changed. He took the boy in. Whispers spread. Some called him foolish, others mocked him. "You cannot save them all," a neighbor warned. But he was no longer seeking the approval of men. He was answering a higher call. Years passed. Nathanael became a light in the darkness, a refuge for the weary. Others, drawn by his example, began to follow. A new community formed, not built on power, but love and sacrifice. Yet trials continued. Famine struck the land and food grew scarce. The very people who once mocked him now sought his help. Nathanael gave freely, even when his own portion dwindled. A chosen one does not hoard, but shares. For what is given in faith multiplies, he would say. Then came the persecutors. The village elders, threatened by his growing influence, accused him of spreading dangerous ideas. "We have followed the old ways for generations," they declared. "Who are you to change them?" Nathanael did not argue. He continued his work, knowing that truth does not require defense, but demonstration. One night the messenger returned. "You have done well," he said. "But I have done so little," Nathanael replied. "It is not for you to measure the greatness of your deeds," the messenger said. "The chosen are not called to be great. They are called to be faithful, and faithfulness moves mountains." Nathanael fell to his knees, overcome. He had spent his life searching for a great destiny, only to learn that his greatest calling was serving. And so, he continued, not seeking recognition, but answering the voice that had once whispered in his soul, for he was chosen, and the chosen do not turn away. In the years that followed, Nathanael's village transformed. No longer a place of indifference, it became a haven for the outcast, where the hungry were fed and the weary found rest. Nathanael watched young men and women take up the mantle, extending kindness beyond their borders. But trials did not cease. War came to their land and fear gripped the hearts of many. Soldiers arrived at the village gates, demanding supplies and recruits. Nathanael stood before them, unarmed yet unwavering. "We give freely to those in need, but do not fight your wars. We serve a higher kingdom," the commander sneered. "And what kingdom is that?" "All not built by hands," Nathanael said, meeting his gaze. "A kingdom where the least are the greatest, where power is measured not in swords, but in love." For a moment silence reigned. Then, without a word, the soldiers turned and left. Nathanael watched them go, knowing his work was not yet finished. For the world would always resist the light, but the chosen ones must shine regardless. And so from the beginning he answered the call, not for glory nor recognition, but because he could not do otherwise. The mark of the chosen. There was something different about Elias. The villagers had always hushly whispered about it, unsure whether to revere or fear him. He was not like the others. His eyes, a deep well of understanding, seemed to look straight into a person's soul. Even as a child, he often fell silent, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. "De Alco has the mark of the chosen," his grandmother would say, stroking his hair. But such a gift is also a burden. Elias did not understand at first. Why did the pain of others weigh so heavily on him? When a stranger passed, he could feel their sorrow as if it were his own. When a neighbor rejoiced, his heart swelled with their joy. It was as if his soul was tuned to a melody beyond the grasp of ordinary men. One evening, an old traveler approached as Elias sat by the river. His robes were worn, but his eyes gleamed with wisdom. "You have seen more than most," the traveler said, settling beside him. "The burden of deep empathy is not easy to carry." Elias looked at him in surprise. "How do you know?" The traveler smiled. "Because I was once as you are." The chosen ones are set apart, not by their own will, but by the shaping hand of the divine. They are given hearts that feel too much, eyes that see beyond the veil, and a path that others cannot walk. Elias hesitated. "But why? Why must we be different?" "Because the world needs those who can see what others ignore. You have noticed it, haven't you? How truths whisper on the wind, how the presence of God can be felt in the quiet moments. Such awareness is not given lightly." Elias thought of the times he had known things without understanding why. The moment he had urged his father to wait before crossing the bridge that collapsed moments later, or the day he had comforted a grieving widow before the news of her son's death had even arrived. "But what am I meant to do with this?" Elias asked. "I feel lost." The traveler's gaze softened. "A chosen one is never lost. The path is simply hidden until the right moment. Your empathy, your intuition, even your strange experiences, they are all signs guiding you toward your purpose. Do not fear them, embrace them." Elias sat in silence, the weight of the words settling into his heart. He had spent his life feeling different, but now he saw it for what it truly was, a calling, not a curse. "How will I know the way?" he asked. The traveler stood, placing a hand on his shoulder. "When the time comes, you will not need to ask." And with that he was gone, leaving Elias with the knowledge that he was not alone, that his gift had a purpose yet to be revealed. For the first time he felt not burdened, but chosen. The whisper of the unseen. There are moments when the world grows silent. The clamor of reason fades and a quiet knowing stirs within the soul. It is a whisper beyond logic, a voice neither heard nor seen but deeply felt. The gift of intuition, The chosen ones, those set apart for divine purpose, are not guided solely by what their eyes behold or their minds comprehend. They are led by something greater, something ineffable, something eternal. A young woman named Elara lived in a small village nestled between rolling hills. She had always been different. From childhood, she could sense things before they happened. The coming of storms, the sorrows hidden behind forced smiles, the unspoken truths in a person's heart. The villagers called her strange, a dreamer lost in thoughts too deep for one so young. One day, as Elara walked along the riverbank, she heard a voice, not with her ears, but in the quiet depths of her being. "Go to the old well at the forest's edge," it urged. There was no reason, no logic behind it, yet she knew she must obey. When she arrived, she found an old man, weak and thirsty, collapsed beside the stones. She knelt beside him and gave him water from her flask. When his strength returned, he looked at her with piercing eyes. "You listened," he said, "and because of that, I am alive." It was then that she realized this gift was not for her alone. It was a divine thread connecting her to the will of the one who saw beyond time and space. Elara's journey was not an easy one. The world resisted those who walked by faith and not by sight. Many scoffed at her trust in what could not be explained. "Rely on knowledge, not feelings," they warned. "Wisdom is found in study, not in silence." Yet she knew that the limits of human understanding did not bind true wisdom. As she grew older, her trials deepened. Her fears whispered against the voice of intuition. What if she was wrong? What if she mistook divine guidance for mere imagination? But every time she ignored the whisper, she felt an emptiness, a disconnect, as if she had turned away from something precious. And each time she followed, she found herself in the right place at the right moment, fulfilling a purpose greater than herself. One night she sat with her mentor, an elder named Tobias, beneath a sky full of stars. "Why is this gift so difficult?" she asked. "Why does it come with doubt and struggle?" Tobias smiled. "Because you are being prepared. A sword does not come forth sharp and strong without the heat of the fire. Those who are chosen must be refined, their faith tested. If you were given this gift without trial, you would not know how to wield it." Elara let the words settle in her heart. She saw then that her wounds, her rejections, even her fears were not meant to break her. They were forging her into who she was meant to be. To be chosen did not mean to be set apart in comfort, but to walk a road few dared to tread. To trust when all evidence demanded doubt. Her final lesson came in the form of sacrifice. One evening, the villagers faced a terrible drought. Crops withered and livestock perished. Many sought solutions in the wisdom of men, searching for rivers, digging wells in vain. But Elara, listening to the stillness within, walked beyond the village, beyond the fields, to a place no one had thought to look. There, beneath an ancient tree, she found a hidden spring, untouched and pure. When she returned with the news, the villagers finally saw, not with their eyes, but with something deeper. The one they had once dismissed as strange had led them to salvation. From that day on, Elara was no longer seen as the girl who listened to whispers. She was known as the one who walked with God, followed the unseen path, and found the way. Intuition is not a fleeting feeling or a mere instinct for chosen people. It is a divine compass, guiding them beyond the boundaries of logic, beyond the expectations of the world. Their struggles, their wounds, their trials, they are not meaningless. They are preparation. And in breaking free from the noise of materialism and doubt, they find the greatest truth, that faith is not about seeing, it is about trusting the one who does. The trials and transformation of the chosen ones. The night was darker than any Elisha had ever known. It was not merely the absence of light, but a shadow pressing into his soul, whispering doubts he had long buried. He knelt by the cold stone of the wilderness floor, his prayers trembling between faith and despair. He had once been certain of his calling, once confident that the Almighty had set him apart, but now, stripped of his comforts, his old self lay in ruin, and he was left wondering if he had misunderstood his purpose all along. This was the dark night of the soul, the crucible through which the chosen must pass. It was not punishment, but refinement, a fire that burned away illusion. Had Moses not wandered 40 years? Had Job not sat in the dust, questioning the very voice of God? It was only in loss that they found true vision, and so Elisha clung to that ancient truth, though every fiber of his being cried out against it. He wandered the desert for days, sustained only by water from hidden springs and the faintest whispers of divine presence. The weight of his own expectations crushed him. He had thought the path of the chosen would be clearer, less fraught with suffering. But then, in a moment between weariness and surrender, a revelation came. A single phrase, quiet as a breath but sharp as a sword. "Lose yourself, and you will find me." The words settled into his heart like a seed breaking open beneath the earth. He had clung too tightly to his own will, mistaking his desires for divine command. He had sought greatness when he should have sought humility. And now, as the last of his pride melted away, something new was born in him, a hunger, not for answers, but for God himself. The transformation had begun. Elisha descended from the wilderness changed, though the world would not see it at first. The true work of the chosen is often unseen, a shifting of the soul rather than the shaking of mountains. He took up the disciplines of the Spirit, prayer that was no longer a plea but a conversation, meditation that emptied him of self and filled him with divine wisdom, self-awareness that exposed the shadows within so that light might cleanse them. He did not become perfect, nor did he become free of trials, but he became something better. He became faithful. He learned faith was not the absence of doubt, but the courage to walk through it. He learned that surrender was not weakness, but the gateway to power beyond himself. He learned that to be chosen was not to be exalted, but to be broken and remade, again and again, until only God remained. Years passed, and Elisha's life bore the fruit of his transformation. He did not seek to be a prophet, yet his words carried wisdom that others sought. He did not strive for influence, yet his humility drew people to him. He did not demand signs from God, yet miracles followed in the wake of his faith. He had ceased trying to control the divine and instead became a vessel through which it flowed. One evening, as he sat beneath the same stars that had once seemed so distant, a young seeker approached him. "Tell me," the young man asked, "how does one become chosen?" Elisha smiled, the lines of his face carved by years of trial and grace. "By losing yourself," he answered, "and being found by God." The young man furrowed his brow, waiting for something more, but that was all Elisha offered. He knew now that the greatest truths are not grasped with the mind, but received by the soul, and those who were truly called would understand in time. For the path of the chosen is not one of certainty, but of surrender, not of power, but of transformation. And it is in that transformation that they truly find the one who called them from the very beginning. The voice in the wilderness. Nathanael had always known he was different. From the time he was a child, he could sense things before they happened. His father, a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, often dismissed it as mere imagination. "Only God knows the future, my son. Stay close to him, and he will guide your steps." But it was not the future Nathanael saw. It was something deeper, a whisper in his heart, an urging that could not be explained by mere reason. One evening, as he mended his father's nets, he felt it again, an unshakable pull, a voice not of sound but of certainty. "Go to the Jordan. There you will find the one who calls in the wilderness." He could not understand why, but he knew he had to go. The journey took him through dusty roads and sun-scorched fields. Along the way he met travelers who spoke of a prophet, a wild man clothed in camel's hair, crying out that the kingdom of God was near. When Nathanael finally arrived at the riverbank, he saw him, John the Baptizer. His voice rang out like thunder. "Repent, prepare the way for the Lord." Nathanael was captivated, not just by the words, but by the fire in John's eyes. And yet, beneath the fervor, he sensed something else, an anticipation, a waiting. John was not the answer. He was pointing to something or someone greater. Then the moment came. A man stepped forward, unremarkable in appearance. Yet when Nathanael saw him, his heart trembled. There was no doubt. This was the one. John's voice broke with awe. "Behold, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." Nathanael watched as Jesus entered the water, as John hesitated and the heavens seemed to pause. And then, as Jesus rose from the river, the sky opened. Unmistakable and eternal voice declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." At that moment, Nathanael understood. The whisper in his heart, the urging he had followed, it had all led here. Intuition was not a gift of his own making. It was the voice of God speaking through his soul, guiding him beyond logic, beyond fear, beyond the world's expectations. Later, as he sat by the fire, reflecting on all he had witnessed, John approached him. "You heard it before you saw it, didn't you? The call." Nathanael nodded. "I don't understand it, but yes." John smiled. "Blessed are those who have ears to hear. The world will call it foolishness, but the kingdom is not for those who cling to reason alone. Faith begins where logic ends." Nathanael knew his life would never be the same. He had been called not by words, but by the quiet certainty that whispered deep within. And for the first time, he understood what it meant to walk by faith, not by sight. Embracing the divine mission. From the dawn of time, humanity has grappled with the idea of divine selection. What does it mean to be chosen by God? Is it an immutable destiny woven into the fabric of existence, or does it emerge like a hidden path unfolding beneath one's feet? This question, ancient yet ever relevant, has puzzled sages and seekers alike. One evening, beneath the vast canopy of stars, a young man named Daniel sat with his mentor, Simeon, an aged scholar. They were deep in conversation, pondering the words of Meister Eckhart. "The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me." "Master," Daniel asked, "how does one know if they are chosen? Is it written in the heavens, or do we discover it along the way?" Simeon smiled, his gaze thoughtful. "Tell me, Daniel, when a river flows, is it destined to reach the ocean, or does it carve its path as it moves?" Daniel considered the question. "Perhaps both. The river is drawn to the ocean, yet it shapes the land as it goes." "Exactly," Simeon nodded. "To be chosen by God is not about possessing external qualifications or bearing marks of divine favor. It is about alignment with the divine, a harmony between the soul and its maker. Some hear the call early in life, while others, like Abraham, do not recognize it until they are old. The journey is as vital as the destination." Daniel frowned. "But if God already knows who is chosen, then do we truly have a choice?" Simeon took a deep breath. "That is the paradox of faith. God's knowledge does not negate our free will. Imagine a great composer who hears a melody before it is played. The music exists in his mind, but it still must be performed note by note by the musician. We are the musicians of our own lives, choosing whether to play in tune with the divine score." As they spoke, a breeze stirred the olive trees around them. Simeon pointed to a sapling growing among the ancient trunks. "See that tree? It was once a seed, indistinguishable from the thousands scattered by the wind. But something set it apart. It found fertile soil, was nourished by the rain, and reached toward the light. It was chosen not by chance, but by response." Daniel's heart stirred. Then being chosen is not about being favored, but about responding to God's call? Yes, my son, Simeon said. Many are called, but few choose to listen. The difference is not in God's invitation, but in man's response. That night Daniel lay awake, staring at the heavens. He realized that being chosen was not about privilege, but about purpose. It was not a passive state, but an active pursuit, an unfolding journey where one steps forward in faith, shaping the path as they walk it. The stars above, silent and eternal, seemed to whisper the same truth. To be chosen is to choose. As the days passed, Daniel sought to test these words. He observed the people in his village, the farmer who toiled tirelessly under the sun, the widow who spent her days in prayer, the merchant who hoarded his riches, and the beggar who gave his last coin to another in need. He saw that it was not circumstances that defined one's chosen status, but the posture of the heart. One afternoon, a stranger approached him as he walked through the marketplace. "Young man," the stranger said, "you seem troubled. What burdens your soul?" Daniel hesitated but then spoke. "I seek to understand what it means to be chosen by God." The stranger smiled. "Then you are already on the path. To seek is to answer the call, for God does not choose as men do. He does not look at appearances, wealth, or power, but at the heart that is willing." Daniel pondered these words long after the stranger had gone. He realized that every act of kindness, every moment of humility, every choice made in faith was a step toward becoming what he was always meant to be. He was not waiting to be chosen. He was choosing, day by day, to walk in the way of the divine. Years later, as an old man, Daniel sat beneath the same stars, now with students of his own gathered around him. One of them, a young woman, asked, "Master, how does one know if they are chosen?" Daniel smiled, remembering the words of his teacher. "The river is drawn to the ocean, yet it shapes its path as it goes. To be chosen is not a title nor a privilege. It is an answer to the call. The question is not whether God has chosen you, but whether you have chosen Him." "But what if fear holds us back?" another student asked. Daniel nodded. "Fear is the great adversary of faith. Many hesitate at the threshold of their calling because they are afraid. But consider Moses, who doubted his own words. Consider Esther, who feared the king's wrath. Each of them overcame their fear by trusting in something greater than themselves. True spiritual leadership is not about control, but guiding others with wisdom and authenticity. It is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And under the silent gaze of the heavens, another seeker began their journey, ready to embrace their divine mission.